without further ado, we're going to launch right into the panel on career trajectories. The reason we're starting with this panel, we moved things around a little bit in the schedule. You may have noticed this panel was not at this time originally. And the reason is that we know that not all of you are set on academic careers, and that's okay. You don't need to leave. We still want you to be here. So we thought that before we tell you about academia and how to get an academic job and how to be successful as a professor, we should tell you about other career trajectories. And everybody invited to this panel has had an interesting career trajectory. And so we wanted to tell you about that and then mostly let you ask questions of the panelists, any question that you like. So I'm going to the way we're going to run the panel is that each panelist is going to speak for a few minutes about their background and anything they want to say about their career trajectory. Then I'll have a few questions to kick things off, but mainly we really want you guys to ask questions. And even though I'm a moderator, I did want to tell you a little bit about my trajectory just because it's also quite unusual. So first of all, I had no idea I wanted to be a professor, as most professors have no idea they want to be professors. So I got all my degrees from Berkeley. After undergrad, I worked in Silicon Valley for a few years and decided I didn't know enough to solve the hard problems I was working on. I went back for only a master's, then got a PhD because I fell in love with research. I worked at a research lab, AT&T Bell Laboratories, during graduate school. When I finished, I had still no idea what I wanted to do, so I applied for academic jobs, research jobs, and jobs in industry. In fact, I had an offer from Qualcomm, which probably would have made me rich had I taken that job back then, but ended up taking a faculty job at Caltech. I also had a two-body problem. My husband's job was here. He had a startup, so navigating two-body issues when you're deciding about careers is quite challenging, and can talk about that offline or over lunch or over dinner. So I was at Caltech for 5 years, got involved in my first startup there. Came to Stanford in '99. I've been on the faculty ever since, but I've founded 2 startups while a faculty member, once while on leave, once while not on leave. One of them went public last fall, so that was a pretty exciting day. We got to ring the bell of the NASDAQ. And so that's my career trajectory, and I'll turn it over to Fei-Fei.
Sure. Hi. Morning. So excited to see everybody here. So I'll try to be short. So maybe some of you have the same journey as I am. I came to this country when I was in high school, 16-year-old, and went through a public high school and in New Jersey, and became a physics major in Princeton. So I was the only 2 women in that class. So and then after Princeton physics, before Caltech PhD, I actually spent a year and a half in Tibet and almost stayed in Tibet for the rest of my life. So that would have changed my career. And so in Caltech, for about 2.5 years, I was holding an offer from McKinsey, and was just, every time my paper got rejected, I was a step closer to McKinsey. So, and then thankfully, Urbana-Champaign University of Illinois gave me my first and only faculty job offer, and I went there, and then things, even though I stayed in academia, things start to get crazy because I had a crazy two-body problem. My now husband at that time, fiance, was also from the same lab in grad school in the same field. So Andrea knows, we really suffer through almost 6 years of long distance life, finding our own career path. I went from UIUC to Princeton and eventually Stanford in 2007. He went from Caltech, briefly UIUC, to Michigan, and so I have a lot to, a lot of just stories to share with you if you want to find encouragement and happy ending. It was a happy ending. So he came to Stanford 4 years ago, and we both are, senior faculty now, have 2 kids and settled. But it was a pretty treacherous journey. In terms of a recent challenge is on my first ever sabbatical, starting early January this year, I'm now at Google as the chief scientist of AI and machine learning in Google Cloud, which is a really, really challenging and interesting job. So I now have an industry perspective. And just one last thing, and then I'll hand it over, is during this process, we also had a family and have 2 very wonderful kids. So happy to share more offline or in other settings.
All right, so confession time. The only reason why I'm here is because Andrea tells me to be here. Usually when I get an email or phone call from Andrea, whatever it is, if she tells me, you're going to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, be there at 9:15 on Monday, I say, okay. Traffic will be tough, but I'll be there. So it just occurred to me, I was, looking at the panel, and I'm thinking, wow, why did she invite me? So how, I don't know if it's still true, but like these sort of teenage fashion magazine, they usually have picture of what to wear and what not to wear. So, and usually when I remember being a teenager and look at the pictures, and I always pick the wrong one. It's the one I say, oh, I like that one, and there's like, that's what not to wear. So I figured this is on this panel, and I was like, what to do? What not to do? So I have a very conventional education. I have my bachelor degree in electrical engineering and computer science from Davis. After that, I went to work in Silicon Valley, and I just happened to be in Silicon Valley during the time when the personal computer became the thing. So, it was like the second wave for Silicon Valley, and I just happened to be there. And like Andrea, I decided that I didn't know enough. I was going to go back to school, so I went to Berkeley. In fact, we were cubicle mates for many years. Originally, I was going to go for a master's and decided I really like this. I really like being a student, so I stay on for a PhD. So I have both my master's and my PhD in electrical engineering and computer science from Berkeley. After I graduated, it was 1996. 1996 was a very interesting year. I was just about to finish my last chapter in my thesis, and I called up all my friends in the Valley and say, hey, I want to go work for a hot startup. Give me the name. So they say, here are the 3 names. So I wrote down the 3 names, and in alphabetical order, I called up the first one. I called up the first startup. I got a job offer, and I said, sorry, can't take the job yet. I'm taking a road trip in Australia for 6 weeks. I'll see you when I come back. So I went on the road trip, and when I came back, I was told that my startup was bought. And it was bought at that time at the highest per engineer in the history of Silicon Valley. So I take full credit for that. So I went to work for this large company in the Valley, had a wonderful time, and then decided that, I married well. My husband at the time, company did very well. My company was doing very well. It was the dot-com boom. So I decided, I'm going to quit. I have 2 young kids. Let's go around the world for 6 months. So I quit in 2002 and sold most of my stock. I went away, and most places I went didn't have a lot of internet connection. So when I came home, I found out that there was a bust. The dot-com boom became the dot-com bust, and I got out just right before the bust. Again, I take full credit. So I came back. I really, truly do not really need to work for a living, so I decided I want to do a number of things. I teach here at Stanford. I used to teach 3 classes every 2 years, and I've decided that's just too tough on schedule on me, so I only teach 1 class a year. Every other year, Andrea and I co-teach a class together, and I have another class which I'm starting to teach in January. I do a lot of angel investing, a lot of advising, and I'm happy to say most of them actually are former students. So in 2015, I invested in 3 companies that were all our former students. This year, I'm going to buck the trend. I just made my investment and not a Stanford student, so I'm very happy about that. I'm also involved a lot with NGO. I sit on 2 boards, very heavily involved with global health, especially in Africa. I also work on sustainable development, especially empowering women. The rest of the time, I hang out with my kids. I'm about to become an empty nester, so I'm very nervous about that. And I travel a lot, and that's it, really. I mean, I don't have a lot of advice to give you guys because I'm afraid that the advice I give you will be really bad ones.
I'm Ada. I grew up in Hong Kong, and actually my family immigrated here when I was little, but I returned to Hong Kong to study until I finished my undergrad in University of Hong Kong, and then I went to Berkeley for my grad school. Because I like math a lot, so in grad school I studied information theory, which is, I think, is one of the most theoretical branch in electrical engineering. I think, so as most of us, we don't know what we want to do. So my advisor asked me one day, he said, "What do you want to do?" And then I said, "I don't know. What do you think I could do?" And then he said, "How about faculty?" I said, "No, I don't like to talk. And I don't like your lifestyle." So afterwards, I graduated in 2004 from Berkeley, and then I went to Intel. I did, I think the title, maybe it is senior scientist, something like that, and to do chip design, which is totally different from my PhD for the radio processor. After a while in this big corporation, I realized that the pace of the big corporation really doesn't fit me very well. Especially, I saw a lot of people working there. They are graduated from good school, but then after a while, I feel that they need the job more than the job needs them, which is, I think this is really scary. So therefore, after a year, I quit Intel, and then at that time, my advisor, and start a company that is doing millimeter wave radio, which is now, it's quite popular. It is the L2.11AD or the 5G. So we are the first one to commercialize the millimeter wave radio. And because it was the first one, and therefore it failed. So my research is in, PhD research is in massive MIMO. Now it's called massive MIMO. And then my friends are doing the 60 gigahertz radio. So all of us, we together formed a company to try to commercialize this with my advisor. We don't pick the wireless LAN market because it requires standardization. So we pick the wireless HDMI market. After a while, once we finished the Series A fundraising of 18 million, and at that time, our market, it is focused on wireless HDMI. I sit at my home, and then I saw the cable from the TV to the set-top box. It's behind the wall. It's not that troublesome to me. So should I spend the next 5 years? It's just to replace the cable that I don't think is that troublesome. So I said, probably not. And then I accepted the offer from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I went there as a junior faculty. I switched my research area. I know that I don't want to do wireless communication in the middle of nowhere. If I want to do that, I should do it here, not in the middle of nowhere, right? So I want to do something different. And because of family reason, I got interest into biomedical research. And I want to do something in the biomedical area, but I don't know what. So I just went to UIUC. I'm a junior faculty, but I think my lifestyle is like a postdoc. Because I go searching, for what kind of problems that I like and I could contribute. But unfortunately, after 2 years, also because of family reason, I left UIUC about 2 years. I went back home in San Francisco. I started the second company. It is doing NFC, near field communication, in 2008. So it was before NFC was very popular. I thought this is a new form of payment. I even pitched it to the research headquarters in San Mateo. And I learned a lot during that process. And at the same time, I got the offer from Stanford. so it is the second time. And I think I like research more, so I dissolved the company. And what I learned it is dissolving a company is more expensive and more work than starting a company.
Here, here.
Right? Lots of work. So I joined Stanford and then being focused on doing electronic medicine. That is, we try to utilize electronics to treat diseases. So our research spans from really as fundamental as possible, doing theoretical study, to developing integrated circuit prototype, to even to small animal and big animal surgery. So I myself also do the surgery as well. So I train myself from theoretical study to even doing animal surgery. So lately, I try to transition my research from being just a technological invention to develop these devices smaller or better, being able to treat diseases, to being doing research that is more in the discovery mode. So lately, my toy, the most favorite toy project now, it is to build a memory recovery device for Alzheimer's disease. And at the same time, I also starting some companies that it is aiming for elderly. So we build gadgets for elderly, and one of them is just got clinical trial approval. So we're going to try on patients. So I'm just have the heart. It is try to do work. It is for the elderly. That's for some reason, for no reason, I think. I like to do, to being able to contribute to the problem of aging, to the problem of elderly. And that's it.
Wow. I'm Eve Schuler, and I work at Intel. And so it was very interesting. That's okay. That's okay. But let me tell you my journey. So I went off to undergrad. I thought I was certain I was going to be a music or a physics major. I was neither. I was a computer science major. I went to Yale. I chose Yale because I had a great music department. But sophomore year, landed in the class and went, oh my goodness, this is so me. But then I swore off ever going back to school. When I left Yale, I went to a little startup. I thought it was exhilarating to be at a startup. I was on the East Coast. I was in Boston, outside of Boston. But in quick time, very shortly after that, I realized I don't know enough, just like many other people on the panel have already said, I need to go back to graduate school. So I came out to UCLA. I did a master's at UCLA. I was really intrigued. The little startup was all about sort of the beginning of networking computers together. And so I went back for a master's degree with Len Kleinrock at UCLA. And although he was doing a lot of theoretical work on queuing theory, behind all the math, behind networking, and I went, oh, I'm not sure I want to do a master's degree or a PhD in this, but we were building all these distributed systems. After my master's degree, he recommended that I look into this little research institute that was affiliated with USC, which was in Marina del Rey, which was quite beautiful. And but they were at a juncture where they were trying to architect the internet. They were trying to figure out really the beginnings of not just connecting computers, but how do you get audio and video across computers? And again, I chose that job because it was the closest I could get to doing music and technology. It was like, oh, audio, okay. And so I landed in this amazingly interesting place that ended up designing many of the protocols that you use now for multimedia over the internet and doing voice over IP and so forth. So that was kind of fortuitous. But in short order, I also realized that I loved research and that to really get into the clubhouse, I had to have those 3 letters after my last name. It didn't matter how many grants I got or panels I was on. I just needed to get the PhD. So after 6 years of working, I went back to get my PhD, and I went to Caltech. So we've got a lot of Caltech representation here. And again, I was very interested in sort of the scalability of networks and what was going on with ISPs and backbone networks and sort of going from public to private networks. And after my PhD at Caltech, I was 10 years older than my colleagues when I left. I also had my first son, while I was in graduate school, which was a first for my advisor to have a student who was actually pregnant. He'd had lots of male students who had wives who'd been pregnant. So that was kind of an interesting journey. But I I also had a two-body problem by that point, and we ended up making these decisions. We would toggle back and forth. Okay, whose choice is it now to decide where we go? And so it was my choice, and I decided to come up to the Bay Area to work at AT&T Labs Research, which had an outpost in Menlo Park. And that was a really exciting decision, but it was mostly driven by the amazing people that I wanted to work with, because I had been a researcher at this point, and I knew who were the great people in my field. And so I went to work there, but that was short-lived because 9/11 happened. There was a lot of cutback in research dollars, and that lab just kept shrinking and shrinking, and eventually went away when I was 9 months pregnant with my second son. So that was sort of a forced extended maternity leave, which was actually delightful, and which I would recommend. And I did a little bit of consulting in that time as I was trying to figure out, what do I want to do next? And in the end, after consulting for about 6 months, and after, again, talking with people who I met through sort of music, actually, Andrea plays a role in this. I met someone who I was playing four-hand piano with, which is when you sit at the piano and you both are playing, so there are four hands at the keyboard. Happened to say, what are you doing after this maternity leave? And I said, I'm not really sure yet. And I handed her, she said, why don't you apply to Intel? I gave her a resume, and I gave Telly Whitney, who is our speaker this evening, also a resume, because I was very interested in diversity and changing the course of what was going on with women in computing. And that resume ended up on the desk of this one person. Both resumes ended up on the desk of this one person. And so it was a little bit of fate. I went to Intel Labs because throughout my career and throughout graduate school, I had been at Microsoft Research, I'd been at HP Labs Research, AT&T Labs, Intel Research, where I was for 9 years. And I would say the last part of my adventure was about 3 years ago. They killed this wonderful lab that I was in. I was doing, when I first went to Intel, I was working on security and networking, distributed systems. Then I transitioned into and actually fought for the creation of an energy and sustainability labs, and loved it. And then somebody in their brilliance sort of unceremoniously got rid of it. And it made me so mad that I wanted to leave Intel. And on the brink of leaving Intel, someone in one of the business units said, we really need your expertise. Will you come here? And I thought, gosh, I've never been in a business unit before. And so I decided to take my research and my research agenda into the business unit, because frankly, when you do research at every place that you're at, you have to kind of make a case for what you're doing and trying to have impact somewhere other than in papers and whatnot. And so this was the ultimate challenge, was could I convince the business units that the research I was doing, which I didn't call research, by the way, because there's somewhat of an allergic reaction to calling it research, would they embrace it? And so this has been a 3-year journey. First, I was in the software and services business, and now I've been in the Internet of Things business. Both of those are very young businesses that Intel doesn't quite know what to do with, so I'm helping to chart that course. So that's my story, and here I am. I'm really thrilled to be here on this incredibly accomplished panel.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I was also pregnant at Caltech at the same time as Eve, the only woman, the only pregnant faculty member probably across all of Caltech. And like Persis, I had well-meaning colleagues who said you should not have your kids pre-tenure, even though I was already pregnant. They just didn't know that. Anyway, fortunately, I have my best results from my 2 pregnancies. Anyway, so let's, and there'll be more time to discuss kind of work-life balance in some of the later panels, and obviously you can talk to us about anything in the Q&A. I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions. Despite what Mai said, actually, I just want to give a round of applause to the panel, because this was an amazing... I didn't want to wait. I chose the panelists very carefully because I really wanted people that had very diverse and unusual career trajectories to give you really a broad view of many things beyond just being faculty members. So I'm going to start with the first question, and then I'll open it up and maybe intersperse some of mine. But the first question I'd like to ask before we go to your questions is, to everyone on the panel, what do you see as the trade-offs for working in a startup, a big company, university as a faculty member, and a research lab, because all of you collectively have experience in all of those. And I'll start with Fei-Fei.
I was going to suggest start that.
Okay. We'll start with Eve, because I do what Fei-Fei says. All right, we'll start with Eve.
What I've loved about, so I've worked at places that are all different sizes. And admittedly, I am most comfortable in smaller companies. That said, even in an enormous company like Intel, which is about 120,000 people, it's a city in and of itself, there are companies within companies. And I have loved the opportunity to remake myself many times over. So I have sort of changed careers without leaving the company. And I've done very different things than I set out to in my graduate work. I'm just often on another path. So I love being at a big company for all the opportunities it offers. However, I've also likened it to an aircraft carrier because it's very hard to change the direction of a company that size. However, through networking, through being there for a long period of time, you grow your network, you grow your influence. People trust you. You have it's just like being at a university. You have a track record of maybe, being able to predict or forecast or advise that we should head in that direction, and that is a good direction. After time, it's a little less hard to steer the ship. And so I'm kind of at that point. The bad part about a big company is just, there's just so many people, the politics of it, although I imagine there's the politics anywhere. It's just slow moving. I will say that being in a lab in a big company can be the best of both worlds. I never particularly saw myself as someone who was going to be a writer, who wrote tons and tons of papers. So I could, as a faculty member. And so being in an industrial lab, I could write and express myself, but I didn't have to do it at quite the pace of an academic. And chart the course of certain fields. I also really love partnering with academics and helping the company give its money out to academics and centers that it funds. So I play this sort of one leg in academics and one leg in industry role. And so I figured for me that I'm the person at the big company, so that's my perspective. So it's been very exciting there. And I have sought out the very interesting pockets within that big aircraft carrier that are new places that are a little bit like startup companies within the company. So that's been fun.
Okay, so I also work in big company, small startup, and then academic. Because this is the Rising Star, it is focused on women. So I would like to talk about which sectors that I think it is more less gender bias. How about that? Very controversial. I rank it like that. Startup has the least gender bias, in my opinion, because we have a really focused agenda. Everyone is working towards a goal. It is to make the product, to make it successful. So we are more willing to compromise. Our different point of view is to make it successful, including the gender differences. So in my opinion, gender, it is make the less difference it is to do in the startup environment. Next, it is large corporation, and unfortunately, I will rank academic as the least favorable. That's really my experience in 2 schools. Only 2 samples to draw the conclusion from. But at the same time, I think I still like to do academic, even though after I seen all the this spectrum, and I see the pattern. I feel that the trade-off, in my opinion, it is how much soul you want to sell. Then,
Yeah.
right? How much soul you want to sell. I earn less because I sell less soul. Okay, so that's how I made the trade-off that I don't want to sell too much soul. So therefore, this job, it is really suit my the value that in my mind.
So I think of life as like a buffet. And for each the institutions we talk about, large companies, startup versus academics, I think in terms of currency. So what's the currency in the situation? So with academia, to me, currency is smart. So the most important thing is you are the smartest person in the room, or project to be the smartest person in the room. With a startup, you're the one with the most hustle, one with the most street cred. And with the large institution, it's about the connection, like you said, finding your allies, knowing your enemies, reading the tea leaves. And I think that if you look at it in the right way, that they are games, right? They don't, whatever job that you do not represent everything about you, right? They cannot take your soul, right? I'm not giving my soul away. It's valuable. So I look at each of them and I dabble in all three because I find values in all three and I like being in all three. But the trade-off is this, because I dabble, right? I teach here, but I'm not part of the people who make the decision, like what courses the students take, what direction the department should go. I am well aware that that's the trade-off that I'm taking, that I want to have the fun, but I don't want to sit in 25 meetings a week, and that's the trade-off. I work with big company, but like I am not in there pushing the big agenda, and I'm totally fine with it because as long as I know I'm working in something that looks good. Same thing with startup. I'm not willing to work 20 hours a day. I don't want to sleep in my car. And so I invest, I advise, I guide them, but I am not in the trenches with them. So I'm well aware of the trade-off, and I'm well aware that, this is not as deep as I could go with each one of them, but good enough for me.
All right. I'm wondering what I can add to this. I actually, when I was talking about my journey, I forgot a very important thing, and I think it's going to come back to. So we're talking about academia, industry. Industry has big companies and startup. I also want to add one kind of career, since I'm very passionate about what I'm doing, is nonprofit.
Yeah.
So in January this year, I started AI for All, a national nonprofit organization for AI and diversity in education. And it's seed funded by Melinda Gates and Jensen Huang. And we are now, it stemmed from a 3-year-old Stanford program called Sailor Stanford AI Lab Outreach Summer, where we hold a summer camp for high school girls to include them in AI studies and research. And now it has expanded to Berkeley, and next year it's going to expand to other campuses. So I'm going to make a contrast of 3 things. I actually think Andrea picked this question, if I'm not wrong, is because we get this question a lot from our students. And she really is asking for all of you guys. In fact, this is like probably one of the top ranked questions I get. And first of all, I think it's a very, very personal choice and personal question. There is no right or wrong answer. I want you to hear that. And everybody has a different personality, different goals in life, different constraints, different set of conditions. So make your personal choice. I haven't been through a startup other than my 2 kids. And so I will tell you what I love about each and the challenge. So I think if we talk about soul, I absolutely think academia is where most of my soul lies. The singular value proposition of academia, in my own Fei-Fei's definition, is thought leadership. We're not here to make money. We're not here to help Stanford to make money. We're not delivering the next gadget, per se. We're really shining light for humanity in terms of thought leadership for the years, decades, even hundreds of years to come. And that's what I really, really love about that. I love about that, especially as part of that value proposition, I'm working with the young people. And I really, really personally love students. It's hard for me to just, it's not rational. It literally is a very emotional, personal reaction. I just think, I know I'm gonna retire as a professor because that is the part of my my job and my career I enjoy so much, and I love thought leadership. 100 years ago, who are the Googles of our society? We might not remember, but who are the best scientists? and social scientists and scholars. History remembers them, and their thoughts are important for where humanities are, and that's what I aspire to. So, big company. I'm not working with Google, at Google, and oh my God, the politics. I'm like, wow. I definitely don't have enough smarts for that. So it is like a carrier belt. It is huge in big companies, and the network effect is huge. In a way, I think women might have an advantage just because we
Better at it.
Well, yeah, we're more empathetic and all this. But I'm a newcomer, so I don't have all the networks. So the thing that excites me of my role at Google is the impact to the society. And I work in AI. I see AI as the biggest driving force of the fourth industrial revolution. And while Silicon Valley is obsessed with consumer products, what really is driving our world is vertical enterprises, the 12 to 16 enterprises that really defines our life, from agriculture to manufacturing to education to transportation to finance to retail and all this. And that's where my impact gets to be made. At Google Cloud, we deliver the modernized computing service, the AI service, to these industries that are going through this historical transformation of computing and data and machine learning. So that kind of impact, to democratize AI, to make a difference, is what really drives me on my sabbatical at Google. And I can, because of that, I'm sucking up with all the politics and because of that value proposition. But I agree with you. I think companies at the end of the day, no matter what you talk about it, makes money. And no matter what your CEO or entry level, you're there to help the company to make money. You need to find meaning in that journey and reconcile your soul, your meaning with that goal. But that is the ultimate goal of company, whereas the ultimate goal of Stanford is thought leadership. So the last one, the hardest job ever is nonprofit. I'll just be outright there. It really is I don't even know where to begin to tell you. Nonprofit starts with romance. The romance of wanting to change the world, romance of wanting to do good, the romance of I'm not here for money. But the journey is reality. And the reality is that you're not making money for anyone. That means not too many investors are out there to invest you. You are really relying on people's goodwill, and goodwill is, in general, a side dish for most people's life, because they, rather than the main purpose. And yet, it depends on who you are. I find so much reward in the journey of working so hard for AI for all. And one of the most incredible things of this journey of nonprofit is working with the group of hardworking, talented people with the best soul you can find on earth. And for every campus AI for All has expanded to, we know we're making a difference. For every letter we receive from the high schoolers who have taken our camp, you have made one change in someone's life. And that kind of reward, you're not going to get that in a company. And it's even hard to get it in a regular academic setting. And if you ever consider nonprofit, I have two advice for you is only start a nonprofit when you have stripped away all the romance. Because you want it to actually succeed and make a difference. And romance doesn't get you very far. So get rid of all that and think about how you can execute. The second is I learned from Silicon Valley is other than the for-profit end goal, nonprofit is by definition not for profit, run it as a startup. That's social entrepreneurship 2.0. There's nothing different between nonprofit and for-profit startup. You have to execute with that kind of vision and execution. That's the only path to potential success. So.
Okay, I'm just going to add a couple comments and then open it up to questions. So I had the choice of not startup, but big company, research lab, or academia when I was sitting where many of you are, which is right at the end of my PhD. And I chose university, academia, because that's where my heart is. I mean, I really love research. I love teaching. I love students. As I've gotten more senior, I love mentoring young academics and professionals. It gives me great joy. And at the end of the day, that's the currency that matters to me, not money, not prestige. That's why I chose academia, and that's still where my heart is. Now, that said, I also have done a couple of startups, and those were incredibly fun and also very, very hard and difficult as well. So I point to, my startup going public as one of the highlights of my career. I can absolutely point to the month, the day, the minute of the worst moment of my career, which was also in my first startup when I realized I'd been edged out by my co-founder and CEO. And I did a really girly thing, which was I went to the bathroom and cried, So it's okay to do that.
Totally.
As long as people don't
Totally.
And so startups, there are no rules like what governs academia and big companies. Basically, the CEO calls all the shots. And the politics in a startup, maybe they're not as complex as in a big company, but they're much more intense, and the repercussions and fallout is much more immediate. Now, the new CEO who came in to replace my co-founder CEO, well, he got fired, and then the third CEO, as the current CEO, brought me back in, and now I'm chairing their technical advisory board. So, there's huge roller coasters in startups. I didn't do a startup to make money. I think if you do, it's a mistake, because most startups don't make money.
Right.
You do it to build something new, to create a vision in technology and change your industry, and that's why I did both my companies, and I was very rewarded from that, regardless of whether I made money or not. So, and then working at Bell Labs was wonderful too. I had a fantastic experience working in a research lab where there's not so much pressure to deliver products. You're working with great people. So maybe I'm just an optimist. One of my license plate when I first started driving customized said, "I love life." So I just love what I do no matter what it is. And I think that's the message, is really pick what you think you will love, because there's no one route to career happiness. And as you've seen from the panel, you'll probably have a very interesting trajectory where you don't pick one thing, but pick what you think you will love, because that's what will give you the most satisfaction in your career. So with that, let me open it up to questions. Do we have some questions to the panel? Don't be shy. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I was wondering, it seems like you do a lot of things, startups and NGOs and so on. How do you find time? And also, is it recognized by your colleagues, or you have to hide it, or do you wait to get tenure to actually follow those side passions?
So when I was at Caltech, I got involved in my first startup, and here at Stanford, the first startup I took a full-time leave of absence. The second startup I didn't take any absence at all. I think that it's valuable as a professor to be involved in industry and startups, whether it's big companies or small companies, because you see things that you can't possibly see as an academic. But it is difficult to find the time to do those things.
So I tend to use the word dynamic balance. It's not, we're pretty old compared to you. So when we describe all the things we did, it's not like we did all of them at the same time. Of course, people like us here tend to do a lot. So it's really important to find that dynamic balance. I tend to focus on one or two important things at a time. I do want to make a comment about do you get recognized for that? At least by this age of my life, and it tends to be, I've always come with that thought that don't expect recognition, what you do. Really the biggest reward is whether it makes you satisfied. Are you doing the right thing? Is it aligned with your own value proposition and your soul? And recognition sometimes come. and sometimes it doesn't. Andrea and I had late night drinking parties complaining about the lack of recognition occasionally. But you find a girlfriend and just complain for a night and move on. But yeah, it will poison your happiness if you're longing for recognition. And whether you do it post tenure or not, I agree with Persis. Tenure is just that day in life you get a letter. But before that day and after that day, the meaning of life is you own it. That letter doesn't own it. And I tell my graduate students, so many of my graduate students, the thing that they're optimizing for is graduation. I tell them graduation is just the beginning of your life. Don't optimize for that. The same thing, don't optimize for tenure. Do what's best. Tenure will come, but you want more beyond tenure. Or, God forbid, you don't get tenure, life still can be amazing because you already did things you love and you continue to do things you love. Maybe you have to switch an institution or a company. So.
I would like to say a little bit more about that because I had an event happen to me a few years ago, and I went to that first business unit. I ran into a woman who's a fellow at Intel. There are very few of those. I happened to run into her in the hallway, and she said, "How are you?" And I said, "Well, do you want the long version or the short version?" She's like, "I want the long version." And we got into this conversation, and she asked me all these questions about, well, what do you want from life? What do you want from your career? And it really reminded me that and by the way, she eventually invited me into the Internet of Things group to start a team and work on my agenda and stuff like that. But it was just one of these hallway conversations that had me realize that it was high time that I go back and reevaluate what do I want, and to do that regularly and often. And that changes. So what I wanted when I first came out of school was this exhilarating startup experience. And as I got more concrete, I got more anchored in confidence in myself, charting my own career, not maybe fitting into everybody's perfect idea of what a career should look like. I became a little bolder at asking for things that maybe other people weren't doing. But the real point that I'm trying to make is stop and evaluate what do you want. And I mean from the top down. So when she said, "What do you want from your career?" I could tell her all the research goals I had. But what was more interesting was, what did I want from the person I worked for, from the organization into which we reported, into the company that I worked for? What kinds of aspirations did we hold about changing the world? So what were those, Internet of Things for social good aspirations that we had? And could we do those within the context of our organization? So evaluate and reevaluate, because you're going to change and evolve. That was so for me, that was my most recent transformation, was really go back to square one and ask, what do I really want, and was I on that course? I'm probably due again. It's been about 3 years.
More questions? Yeah.
So for the academic path, I've always heard that you kind of have to follow the steps. You postdoc, you go on a path, and then once you get there, you get the professorship, then you can go and do these side projects, like a startup and so on. How often do people go off and do a startup first and then come back to the academic world, and how difficult is that transition?
You mean do a startup before you take an academic job?
Ada, you did
Ada's the one to answer.
I don't think it's too difficult. It's just if you want to do it, then just go ahead and do it. If cannot do it, then it is fine. Yeah, there's no rule. And then just follow your heart. Whatever you like to do, just go ahead and do it. And if it is you cannot do it, then move on to do something else. Yeah.
I think Ada's very unusual because it is uncommon to go do a startup and then get a faculty job, because basically to be competitive for a faculty job, you're looking at publications. Are you known? Are you networking with people in academia? So I think it's very rare to be successful, as Ada was, in doing a startup and then getting a faculty job. And startups tend to be all-consuming, and it's probably a 3 to 4 year journey before you can extricate yourself from a startup. So that's a long time to be out of the academic world to to try to get back into it, I think. But it's not impossible. We have a success story here.
I still remember that there's one time I was in the board meeting. So I have to finish the board meeting. It ends at 6 o'clock for the first hour. And afterwards, I have to fly to CMU at 10 o'clock, red eye, to do my interview. Red eye. And then I was so headed, at 6 o'clock in the evening. But I got the offer the second day on the spot. And then I was so tired. I called my advisor. I said, they gave me the offer. But I don't have much feeling. And I said, congratulations. I'm so tired, and this place is so dirty. And it is cold. I just keep complaining. And then afterwards, I feel that actually it is, as what Andrea said, this is actually it's quite hard. And he said that maybe it's because you don't have enough sleep. Therefore, you are not that aggressive and more friendly to people. Yeah, that may help.
Question?
So I guess with all the focus on publications and everything when you're going to apply to a faculty position, if for whatever reason you can't be a postdoc or you don't get on the track to be a postdoc, and you end up joining like a research lab at a company where I think you can publish, but maybe it's internal or maybe it's not like the frequency that postdocs would have. When you make that decision, do a lot of people end up totally shut out of being a faculty person later? Because I know in my undergrad, a lot of our advisors had worked in industry, but they were all also like much older and in a field where that was more common. But I'm in solid state. I don't see that happening very often.
Yeah.
I know lots of people who have gone from industry to academia. And again, it may be that you get to a point in your career where you're just known for doing good work, and the number of publications you have, it may not have to be off the chart. You don't have a whole gang of graduate students or postdocs helping you with those publications. But if you have solid publications that are referenced, the number is less important. It's really your reputation.
Yeah, I searched on the search committee for many years. We don't look at the numbers. We look at the quality.
Citation.
Yeah.
One question about it, again, related to faculty position, people look at publications, and then so before we get faculty position, we need to make a lot of choice. So for example, from PhD to postdoc, we need to choose a group. But at this time, there are several different choices, like whether you should choose the best for your career, for example, a more important publication, or you want to choose, for example, I've done this research for so many years, I want to choose a totally different new area which I'm interested, but it's not related, so that has a higher challenge for me, for example, like publication. So should I follow my interest, what I would love to do, or should I follow what is the best for my career?
You should follow your interest.
Yeah, I always say that if you do what you love, even starting with PhD students, when they're first starting out, you can try to game the system and say, okay, how am I going to have the perfect job application? And of course, Eric and others today will tell you how to have the perfect job application. But really, if you do what you love, you will have a much more powerful application because you will have done really amazing work, and your passion for it will come through in the papers that you write, in the talks that you give, and the people that you interact with. So, whether you switch or don't switch, I think that's a very individual situation, a place to use your mentors to when you're faced with a choice like that, to, talk to people and try to find out. But at the end of the day, I really believe if you do what you love, you'll be fine professionally.
Yeah, I also, many of us have been sitting on search committees for many years. So first of all, I totally agree with what Andrea said. Your talent, passion, and impact will shine through in areas you love. You might want to, if you're in postdoc stage, you're switching to a new area, it might take a little bit longer, but please remember life is a marathon. Just because your lab mate had an assistant professorship 2 years earlier than you doesn't mean anything, because the fact that You switch the field, might later accelerate your career because now you have two fields, areas of expertise under your belt, and they might come back and reinforce each other. And second is just on the flip side, your assumption is if you stay in the area and continue to do the best work that gets you to a faculty job the quickest, when your heart is not in a place, I really would challenge you and ask you, are you going to be able to do the best work? You think you're making the most rational choice, but if your heart is not there, it's unlikely that passion and creativity and all that will shine through.
I would also say that one of the things that I've run into a lot is it's actually a problem, I think, with our graduate programs, is that we don't teach combat training. So you have these ideas that you're passionate about, and you can be convinced out of them easily because there are many more naysayers, people who think they're crazy, that's impossible, that's even stupid, and I've had to go back and help people eat their words, but staying the course for the thing that you're passionate about really helps you get through that, because inevitably you always will be questioned. And so I would echo this: stay on the path of being passionate about something. You have insights, you're researchers, you're at the leading edge of fields where you can see where things are going. And so if you have an intuition about that, be tenacious. And often it's where your passion is.
Yeah, at the end of the day, happiness is the most important, right? You do things you feel happy every day is more important than anything else.
I always have a test, whether it's my student coming and like, should I go to graduate school? Should I study physics? Should I do this? Or my startup people is like, I have this idea. I always ask them, I sit them down, ask them to take a deep breath and say, tell me about it, whatever it is that you are coming to talk to me about. Watch this. As soon as they sit and I say, tell me about it, and they will suddenly sit straight up, break into a beautiful smile and say, whatever it is, I want to create the 17,947th food delivery system for the world. Doesn't matter what it is. But if they break into a spontaneous smile, it tells me a lot. The kind of questions you guys have been asking is about, can I draw, where is the boundary within which I can draw? I'm asking you, like, what if you draw outside of that boundary? No. Is the boundary police going to come and get you? Is your life going to end? No. What if you fail? What if you fail? What is going to happen when you fail? And I think that's especially more important for you guys because you have been perfect all your life. I bet all of you have been perfect, right? You've done all the right things to get here. So what if the next thing you want to do is not on that path of perfection?
Or get used to failure.
Yeah, no big deal.
You learn the most from failure.
Yeah.
Learn the most.
Get used to it.
Okay, we're short on time. Let's see. Actually, we're out of time. I'm sorry, because we want to get to Eric Pop. So, but I think that the fear of failure. Well, I guess there's two themes. One is choose happiness, and the other is not to be afraid to fail. So Stanford rejected me for graduate school, which was kind of devastating at the time, and here I am on the faculty. And I think all of us have great stories about the failures that we've had and how they've actually contributed to our success later on. So choose happiness and don't be afraid to fail. I think it's a good summary for this panel. So I'd like to thank the panelists one more time.